and the brothers and sisters, you come up with half of the population is affected by adoption. And the other half is affected by divorce.
Exactly.
So we have a lot of young people who are searching for their dads, they're searching for that part of the family, that half of the family that they lost touch with. Their paternal grandparents, their, that side. So the timing for people wanting to find family and to reconnect is just right. And everyone has the right to know. We're talking about family. We're talking about family connections. Every person has a right to know their mother, their father, their brothers, their sisters, their aunts and uncles, and their grandparents. Everyone has a right to know those people. And for the state to come along and say that you don't have a right, that by virtue of, this is what cracks me up, adoption was in the child's best interest. Now that child grows up and says, I have a need, I have a deep need to want to find out who my family is, and the state says no. Talking about family connections. Every person has a right to know their mother, their father, their brothers, their sisters, their aunts and uncles, and their grandparents. Everyone has a right to know those people. And for the state to come along and say that you don't have a right, that by virtue of, this is what cracks me up, adoption was in the child's best interest. Now that child grows up and says, I have a need, I have a deep need to want to find out who my family is, and the state says no. There were a lot of siblings that were split up. Back in the 40s and 50s, before women were really active in the workforce, if a man left the home, there was no place for her to go. There was nothing for her to do. And the social service would come in and say, let us help you. And the way they helped you was they took your children, they put them in foster homes, and they often split them up, especially if there were large family, sibling groups, 7, 8 kids. And those kids have all been, searching for one another. It's possible they may be disappointed, but knowing is better than not knowing. We had one young girl, and this is very unusual because most of the birth mothers that are found are normal, average, middle class, church-going, people. I mean, they're just nothing out of the ordinary, but they're certainly not what a lot of people think of as the low class, slum, prostitutes, or whatever. That's just not the norm. First of all, we have a 95% success rate in finding, and we have a 98% success rate of people who are very receptive to being found. It's a very, very small percent. Most of the women who feel a little bit threatened, that 2%, are older women in their 60s and 70s, because they're from a different era. They were told to go on with their lives and never talk about it, and it was a big dark secret. They never told their husbands, they never told their children. They feel as though they have the big scarlet letter on their chest, which is the way I felt for years. Oftentimes they will come around within 6 months. Once you've opened that door and they realize that there's nothing to fear, they will come around. So yeah, the reception rate is very high. There's a lot of fantasies attached, I think, on both parts. And most people, when they get into it, they don't know what they're looking for. But we have concluded that it's mostly identity. We're all looking for the identity, especially adoptees. Who am I? Where did I come from? Adoptees have been stripped of their entire medical history, their genetic history. We call it ancestricide. Their whole ancestry has been wiped out by virtue of adoption. And so I think that's what most adoptees are looking for. It's possible they may be disappointed, but knowing is better than not knowing.
I recommend, first of all, they understand the 10 steps of the adoption process. If they don't know what goes on with the adoption process, they don't know how to begin the search. They don't know what paper trails to follow, where to look for information. So they're going for a needle in the haystack if they don't know the process. They must start there.
First of all, I think it's important, especially for adoptees and birth parents, to be in a support group. It was just a real help to me to be with other people. But the way I started was I started writing letters to the attorney who had done the adoption. I contacted the doctor. I went to the courthouse, all the places that, the home for unwed mothers, all the places where you had connections to during that time period is the place that you need to begin.
Well, if you can imagine, the birth mother begins, once she's pregnant, she makes a decision to give up the baby for adoption. The process begins on paper. When she checks into an unwed mother's home, the unwed mother's home assigns a social worker to her. The adoptive family has also hired an attorney to handle the legal proceedings. The mother surrenders the child. This is a termination of her rights, and the surrender has a time period involved. The surrender has to be filed before the attorney can file a petition in a court of jurisdiction for the adoptive family to take this baby. Now, once the attorney asks for this baby, a year must go by before the adoption is final. So we have a petition, we have a final decree, we have a surrender, we have medical records from the hospital. The paper trail is about a mile long of what goes on in an adoption proceeding.
The most important thing you can do is go to the agency and ask for non-identifying information. Sometimes you can beg your social worker, to please give you that what we call identifying information. Identifying means the name or where that birth mother was from, her date of birth, all those key pieces of information that are going to help you find that person. And the only way you can do that really is to get somebody to help you with that, because that's going to be the brick wall that you run into.
The adoptive family most of the time can tell you where this adoption took place, how they got this child, who the attorney was, but they don't always share the information. The search for an adoptee is totally different from the search for a birth parent. They're two separate types of searches.
As far as which is easier, it's usually easier to do an adoptee search, searching for the mother, than it is the other way around. Birth parent searches are really tough, because what you do, you have to get the amended name. You have to find the new name of the adoptee, and it's much easier to find the birth name than it is to find the amended name.
Number one, where did the adoption take place? Let's see what records are available on public records.
Start out on the public level.
Oh yeah, look for that petition and that final decree. It gives you a world of information, and from there you can build on it.
It's real important for adoptees, particularly, to go back to their agency and request what's called non-identifying information. Adoption records, of course, are sealed throughout the country. But if you can get the non-identifying information, that'll at least, help you to begin to formulate some leads. Besides the fact that a lot of adoptees do have their names. Sometimes the name appears on the adoption decree, and a lot of adoptees aren't even aware of that. They're very fearful of talking to their adoptive parents, and we try to encourage them to do that, because often the adoptive parents have information that will help them in their search.
There is an original birth certificate issued at birth, but once the adoption is final, an amended certificate is issued. The records are sealed when the adoption is final and kept at a state level of the government. State, not local. The records are always there, but they're sealed, and certain states have certain laws. Maybe with a court order you can open the record. 2 states have open records, and all you have to do is ask for it, and they'll give it to you. To get a court order, you must have a medical emergency or a life and death situation. It's not that common to get them open, but some states are easier than others. Some judges are more lenient than others. So everything, there's nothing in concrete here. Everything varies. So the laws change, they vary from state to state, but every year there's something.
You have to understand that in this particularly, when you use the word adoption, we tell people don't use the big letter A. I mean, don't say that when you're even talking to people, because it'll turn a lot of people off. I mean, they'll clam up immediately. So see, adoption still really is now the closet. I mean, this is a real controversial issue. I have no problem with it. because I believe that records should have never been sealed in the first place. And they tell me I'm breaking the law.
Do you think there's...
I'm reuniting families. We have been fighting in the what we call the adoption reform movement to get the records open at age 18. That once that child becomes 18, they should have access to their original birth certificate and all records concerning themselves. Now, to us, this is a civil rights issue. It's unconstitutional that that segment of the population has been denied basic rights that you and I enjoy. You and I can go in and request a copy of our original birth certificate. They can't. To me, it's just ludicrous that these records should have ever been sealed in the first place. Now we have what's called open adoption, where adoptees meet the birth parents and everything's open. What we are trying to force right now is we're trying to force open closed adoptions. Adoptions that are now closed, we are trying to force open. If you find a yearbook, start calling a few of those people. Somebody may remember somebody who was pregnant during that year. You might find a friend. Some people have found that way. Some people have found by running an ad in the local paper. If they knew where the birth mother was from, they would run a little ad in the paper, in that area. If you have her date of birth, you might check with somebody who could check a driving record for you. Once you have a name, you're basically halfway home because for all intents and purposes, you have a genealogy search on your hands once you have the name.
In that particular case, I found out what the married name was through the church, but there is no place. I mean, there might be genealogical groups, but I don't use them that much. And let's face it, a lot of people are not into genealogical and studies and things like that. So finding the maiden name of the woman you have to really scratch real hard for it.
The personal work is what I really enjoy on locating someone. Again, you start out with your basic background in a criminal case or a courthouse case, and you look for what public records are available. In the particular case that you and I were discussing before, I do a fair amount of work with adoptive children or parents who have adopted out their children and try to reunite them when it is feasible to reunite them. The case that we were talking about here was a pro bono case that I didn't take any payment for. And a woman had contacted me and wanted to find her natural mother, or her natural parents. She didn't care which one was found. And it involved a lot of phone work. The last name involved was Smith, and I kid you not. And that's a real rough thing to work on. But again, I had her do a lot of the work. I told her how to make the phone calls, what to ask. And she spent the time, she was home during the day, and she spent the time working on it, made phone calls to doctor's offices, to hospitals where she knew she'd been born, and I just printed out lists of people with the same last name in her area, and it took her about 2 to 3 months. But she found, actually we didn't find her mother or father initially, we found her sisters, who she didn't even know she had 3 sisters. And in finding her sisters, we found her parents, and I think about 4 months ago they had a huge family reunion.
What is this?
This is the letter that she wrote me. Actually, we were pen pals. How I came across the case is she's a pen pal of mine through a book club that I belong to. And she wrote the book club and didn't tell me she did so. And it wasn't until I opened up the newsletter for the book club the next month that I saw this really lovely letter that brought tears to my eyes where she thanks me publicly for helping. And she said, I mentioned that I've been searching for my birth family. I'm 31 now and adopted when I was 2. After 3 months with her help, meaning what she did with me, I found my birth family. So that meant a lot to me.
Once you have the name, as I think I mentioned earlier, the first thing you need to do is make sure you get the non-identifying information. If you've got the name and you've got some non-identifying information from the agency, you know how old she is, you maybe know the area she was from, that's where you should start. You're now going to search out that name. You're going to take that surname and run with that. And let's say we know that maybe she was in a certain area in New Jersey. So you're going to search out that surname in that particular area, because what you may find is some relatives. You may find a brother or an uncle, somebody who knew her. High schools, go back to, the high schools where she may have gone. Things like that. There's a lot of data banks available now. There's a lot of phone listings where you can check a surname, have a surname search run, for a nominal fee. Adoption searches are so different than the ordinary. In other words, when you go out to hire an investigator or a detective, they usually charge you a retainer, and they charge you an hourly fee, and there's nothing wrong with that under normal circumstances. But adoption searches are much different. So that's why we tell people that you really need to beware. If somebody asks you for money, all the money up front, and we do have, in fact, a local agency that's doing that, there's no motivation for them to find. So I wouldn't suggest that anybody do that. If somebody says to you, well, it's $1,200, send your money or put it on your MasterCard or whatever. There's no motivation. And then, of course, the other thing is if they don't want to spend the time because it's very time-consuming, they can hire somebody to do that. We tell people they need to beware because there are a lot of vultures out there naturally who are going to take advantage of their vulnerability. Our own organization does do searches. We work on a no fine, no fee. If we don't find, you don't pay. So we feel that's a real good way to operate. We're all connected with the adoption triangle. All of us here are parts of the adoption triangle in some way or another. Registries are very ineffective for several reasons. First of all, if the person's not alive, there's no way that person can register. That should not deny the adoptee access to their brothers and sisters, to their aunts and uncles, to their grandparents. The intermediary system we don't approve of because we feel that it's of such a personal nature that it's between the people involved and that nobody, no outside person should come, in between that personal experience. So we just feel that the direct contact, you either do your own search or you hire someone to do it for you, and you get the job done. Yeah, we think support is real important for adoptees because you go through so many emotions. You feel like you're on a roller coaster. Some days you're up, some days you're down. Some days you don't know where you are. And so it's real important to be in a support group. And we have support groups all over the country. We have magazines, there's newsletters. We have a magazine out called AdoptNet. It's a magazine of adoption networking and support. We have a reunion. Reunion. We have a magazine called Reunions. This covers all types of reunions, not just adoption. Any kind of military reunions, family reunions. It's just a generally reunion type of magazine.
The magazine I have, Searching Magazine, includes a list of all the people that I know of that have contacted me that are searching for someone. It is like a mutual consent registry. It is nationwide. I have hundreds and hundreds of people waiting to be reunited, and this book is being distributed as fast as I can distribute it. It's called Searching Magazine. It's a quarterly magazine. I urge anyone that's looking for someone to register. It only costs $10 to register. You're in that computer and now you're in that magazine, and your chances are increased that you might find who you're looking for without even conducting a search. They may be looking for you also. I give away my secrets. Secrets for successful searching. This is how to find almost anyone. And it's not only just how to find them, it's the techniques that work for me. It's all the examples of how to ask the questions and what really works. There's nothing else like it. I recommend this book highly for anybody, whether they are investigators, whether they're retired FBI agents, no matter what their background. If it's just the average person off the street, they can take this book and go out and find someone.
We have 4 different search books that we carry. If people are interested in searching themselves, these books will sometimes help them. It's called the Adoption Search Book. This one is called the Adoption Search Book, but we have 3 other search books that are available. We also carry 25 other titles. Some of them are biographies like my own. We have books on open adoption for people who are looking to adopt but want an open relationship. This is a classic called The Adoption Triangle. We have 2 books on marriage. We have a book 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 on by Dr. Sorosky and Annette Barron. It's probably one of the most classic books out that first brought an awareness to society of the need for people to want to find and connect. Yes, back in 1954, at the age of 15, I gave up a child for adoption. And of course, I had no idea at the time that it was going to affect my life the way it did. I never got over the experience. I wondered for years and years what happened to her. And finally, in 1976, I saw an article in a newspaper about a reunion. And I called the girl that was reunited with her mother, and I said, you know, is there any hope for me? And she said, we have a support group. This was up in Philadelphia. And I went to the support group, did my own search, took me about a year, found my daughter, and it changed my life.
Well, there would be two reasons that they may want to do an asset search on the individual. The first is prior to commencing the lawsuit, and the reason is because if a person does not have anything, why waste your time and money in court? If you're not going to collect, there's no reason to get a judgment. The other reason is, once you do obtain a judgment on someone, find out what you can attach a lien to by conducting an asset search.
Assets are defined as can be somebody owning real estate. Asset could be money in the bank, stocks, bonds, brand new car with no lien. I mean, anything that someone can attach onto something is considered your asset. You know, anything you have could be your asset. Your bedroom set. I mean, everything's an asset. Your $200,000 house, it's an asset. What happens a lot of times, people are sued, or they win a judgment in court, and you try to collect from an individual. Okay, now you have to know the assets of an individual. Does he have income? Income is an asset. You know, an income. You can garnish the wages. You have to find this information out. It takes investigation. It takes a little digging. What you have to learn is go to the courthouse. See if this individual has property. Just bring his name up to the real estate division, the auditor's office, the treasurer. They'll check this information for you. You can even look this up yourself. Sometimes you can get this information on the phone. Just give the name or the address, or just the individual's name sometimes. In some counties, they can look up and see if this individual has property. You have to know the county where the person has real estate. It's a county listing. It's located at the county courthouse. It's the treasurer's office, the auditor, the property assessor, and this information can be secured through that office.
Well, basically, you have an individual get a judgment on someone, and basically coming out of the courthouse with paper in their hand, that judgment doesn't mean anything until you try to collect on it. So you have to find either bank accounts or something to attach, like a vehicle, real property. Now it depends on real property whether you're going to go after a house. If he has homestead on the house, you're not going to be able to touch it. However, if he owns the lot next door, you can grab that lot. If he owns another apartment building or anything like that, you can grab that. Main thing, the easiest and the fastest to get your money from is bank accounts.
We can also find that information via subpoena as well. Always better to get it free. Get it with a subpoena. You sue the guy, give me all of your records. And that means the bank applications for a loan for the house. They're going to want to know all about you. Who your mother and father were, where they were, someplace you made out that application. That's public information someplace, or obtainable by a subpoena. You get that, then you start tracking.
If it's a document concerning bank records or some type of other records, it's out there. It's just that you have to be able to know where to look for it and how to dig for it and where to dig for it. Because you'd be surprised, in some files you'll find things that are unbelievable. Unbelievable.
You could write to the state, pay a fee, and then they will send you back everything that person owns. Or you can check the courthouse records, find out what property, tax assessor's office check the property in that county for it. But then you also, when we do something in Florida here, we check the whole state for property at one time, which would be very difficult for you to do. You'd have to go county by county throughout the state, checking in the tax rolls, find out what property belongs to the individual solely in his name, not with interest with anyone else.
Right here, two sides, all the land records in Brevard County for 1 year. Cost me $40, saves me umpteen hours, because every jerky attorney and doctor thinks we can't find them. They have their home listed right here. They have the unlisted phone number. So for $40, we get all their addresses. Okay. Now, we keep every one of these. So if I look up this year and I notice that you don't own the property, I'm not really interested in that. I want to know 5 years ago what property you own. Now I want it, then it's easy. Once you know where the property is, you track who owns it. And, more than anything else, under subpoena, you ask for the passport.
Now, the advantage that we have is we maintain the microfiche on motor vehicles for years, and we go back over those microfiche to find out, especially if the prior to the date of the judgment, when the lawsuit originally took place, in case anybody's trying to hide assets and they transferred that vehicle to maybe the wife's name or the husband's name or the children's name or the in-law's name or the parents' name.
But running an assets check on either a company or an individual is very similar. The FAA, for example, will have records of any person or company that owns aircraft. The natural resources in each state will have information on boats and vessels, water vessels that are owned by companies and individuals. Again, it depends on what the purpose of the asset search is for as to what assets you're actually trying to uncover.
Assets can also be boat registration, vehicle registration. You can check with the county, the title and tag office, or it's a state listing. You can call up, and some states will check, depending on where your state is, you can write in for the information, or you can telephone in, and for a fee, they'll provide this information to you if the individual has a vehicle or a boat. Boats are usually done county registration, depending on the state, and they'll give you this information if the individual has something registered.
The Department of Natural Resources maintains the records on the boats, liens. That's very important. If there's a big lien on that boat, you don't really want to grab it because it's a hassle to straighten out the lien.
Hidden assets. You have to this can be a long paper trail too. What I mean by that is if someone has some real estate, and I'm talking about a lot of real estate, and you could see if they had quick claim deeds and changed it over to somebody else, maybe a brother, maybe a father. They hid the assets, and that can be detected because they can show you who was transferred from and when. So if you just went through a divorce, you say, well, and 2 days or right before the divorce, he changed all his real estate over to a relative. It's noted in the courthouse. Same thing with bank accounts. He might have changed his banking records over to the children, or over to another relative, since you might have child support custody there. He most likely changed it over to a friend or got the account under his name. I know individuals who had real estate and they put it in their friend's name, and then their friends had fights with them and they took their real estate. So I don't even recommend that, you know.
Now, most assets are moved over to relatives, wives' maiden names, or in-laws, or something along those lines. So you have to know who those people are. Where can I find your maiden name if I don't know? Well, first of all, you start in marital records.
The fella can have a job, but you don't know. You're trying to win your, you got a judgment, now you got to find out if this fella has a job. Okay, so you can attach. What you do is you contact a database company. They'll do a national social security search. Usually on a social security search, an employer will come up. And bingo, you call the employer, and you find out the fella is still working there. You turn it over to the county where you got your judgment, and they'll take it from there. A good way of finding out when an individual is employed by calling a neighbor. Using your city directory, crisscross, gather up some phone numbers, call some neighbors, tell them you're doing you're writing some insurance on a fella next door, and you just need to find out what kind of employment he is involved with. And sometimes the neighbors will tell you.
The best way to do it is to find the employer, number one. You then call, and then just use a pretext. He's buying a car. You want to verify employment? They verify the employment. You want to verify the amount of money that's made each week on a weekly basis, or is it bi-weekly? How does he get paid? Now, here's another one.